Welcome to the podcast Stories of a C question mark O. I'm delighted to be joined today by Charlene Ryan, who is the VP of HR for ABM UK and Ireland. And Charlene, I'll come to you in a second just so you can do a very brief introduction. But before we get into all of this, two things to share. Number one, I say this at the beginning of every podcast, but don't forget to subscribe to below so you don't miss any of the episodes. And number two, today's podcast is an interesting podcast. The title of it is Stats Do Lie. What we're going to explore today is some statistics, and not necessarily some statistics, but some statistics around kind of Charlene's background, where she's come from, etc., and how actually she has bucked the trend of those stats. So be a really interesting conversation today, Charlene. I'm really looking forward to it. But before we get into it, do you want to just give a very brief introduction to who you are and maybe a little brief introduction to your role?
Thank you, James, and thank you for inviting me on the podcast. I'm delighted to be here this afternoon talking to you. I know I'm in very good company, so I would echo your request for people to subscribe and listen to some of the other people you've had on the podcast because it's been amazing. As you said, my name's Charlene Ryan. I am the Vice President of HR for the UK and Ireland at ABM. And for anybody who hasn't heard of ABM, they're a facility solutions provider, very large in the United States, 100,000 employees, 8 billion turnover. The UK and Ireland were about 15,000, about 500 million turnover, but growing. Previous to that, I've had roles in HR in logistics and retail and facilities management, having started off my career, which I'm sure we'll talk a bit more about later on, in hospitality. So that is me. And my role in ABM is developing a people strategy that supports the growth, really driving talent, culture, all that good stuff that we love to do in HR.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, look, let's thanks for the introduction. Let's go back. So as our podcast like to do, we like to tease out people's stories, hence the C question mark O, because everybody has a story. Sometimes we don't express and we don't share our stories, but when we do start sharing them, that's where we get the real motivation and help people to motivate to say actually anything is possible for anybody. So I'm gonna take you back, Charlene, because I always like to take people back, and ask you kind of like, what is your story, and how did that impact kind of you specifically early on in your career?
Yes. Oh, that's quite a question, James. You asked the big questions. So I'm from Luton. I was born in Luton. That was where I was raised, and I still live here now. And Luton sometimes gets quite a bad rep. It often tops the charts of the worst places in the UK to live. It's somewhere that has quite high levels of poverty and deprivation. But it's really important when I talk about my story to say that's where I started and actually where I still am. I am one of two, so I've got a younger brother. There's quite a big age gap between us, 14 years, and we were raised by an amazing single mother. I cannot shout out my mum enough. I'm sure that she's going to get more shout outs as we talk. I have Jamaican heritage, so my mum was actually born in the UK, born in Luton, same as me, but my dad was born in Jamaica, came over to the UK when he was 13, and both sets of my grandparents are from Jamaica as well. So that background, that heritage really informs part of who I am. I think there are a few things when you reflect back. It was never anything that I felt growing up. I never felt like I was missing out. But looking back now, I can see that, we struggled. There wasn't a lot of extra money for things. And I think one of the early drivers of my ambition, and I was going to say career, but when I first started, I didn't really know what I was ambitious for, but kind of quite a key driver of that was financial security and financial stability. And as I say, I never really felt like I missed out, but I do remember when I was young, me and my mum, probably before my brother was born, because I was 14 when he was born, when I was a bit younger, we'd go out and we'd go shopping and we could do that and we'd have a fun time. And then when we'd come back, my mum would sit down with the calculator. So she worked in finance. She was like a finance administrator. She'd get the calculator out and she'd add everything up, And then she'd be like, right, we can keep this stuff, and then this is all the stuff that's got to go back. And I remember thinking, oh, when I get older, the measure of success would be being able to go out and shop and not have to bring anything back. And so, as I say, on reflection, that was definitely one of the things that drove me. I think for me, I was always fairly academic. So I worked hard, but I didn't find academia, I didn't find school or exams, really, really difficult. It was something that I was fairly good at. And it was always kind of assumed that I would follow that route, do A levels, go to university. And even though actually, when you look back at the school that I went to and the area that I came from, probably not that many people did follow that route, but I did, and it never felt odd to me, and it didn't ever feel like I was doing something particularly unusual. And then, similar to a lot of young people, I did my degree. My undergrad degree was in history. I'd been working part-time in a bar, didn't know what I wanted to do, and carried on working there full-time after I graduated. Ended up staying in hospitality for a few years, and became a general manager. It's a bit of a running joke, and I like to talk about this because it says a little bit, I guess, about me as a person. It's like Charlene was a waitress in a bar, and then she's running the bar. It's like a joke with my family that whatever I was doing, I'd always try and be the best and excel at that. Anyway, after that, I was running the bar. I kind of decided that hospitality probably wasn't where I wanted to stay. I think I'm one of the few people that chose a career in HR. I researched a lot of things. I researched how much money can you make, just being fully transparent. What is the earnings opportunity?
Yeah.
The content of the role. I'd always done all of the rotas and the training and all the things I thought HR was, I guess. And then I applied for a graduate scheme at Royal Mail. And I grew up in HR, as I like to say, at Royal Mail. I was there for 14 years. I'm sure we'll talk about some of the other bits, but that was my first foray into HR and really looking for a career and a place where I could get that financial security in the first instance.
Very good. And look, we said at the start the title of today's podcast is Stats Do Lie, and you mentioned Luton and you mentioned where you grew up, and we reflect on that, um, without kind of going way back in time. It's become much more prominent in the workplace now that we look at things like socioeconomic areas and where people grew up. We look at, one of the big measures that the government uses free school meals, and actually, if you get free school meals, how far do you go up in the hierarchy of career, and often it's sometimes it's the and you were I suppose quite lucky from your story that you never really got held back and always pushed yourself to go on to university. But again, as a young black female, coming from Luton, going to university was probably, it wasn't necessarily, I'm going to say it wasn't necessarily the norm, Charlene. So it's almost like you were bucking the trend from the beginning. Now we talk about it a lot more in the world, and you're in HR, and I've spent many years in recruitment, and we talk about it an awful lot of how do we encourage more people. So in this world that is data driven, and we have so much data at our fingertips, it can still sometimes be difficult to really get the true understanding of what is right and what is wrong. But can we always trust that data, or is that data sometimes broken? And I suppose I asked that question maybe through kind of your experience having grown up, but also through the lens of, look, you're VP of HR, you're at a senior level within ABM, you know, through the HR lens as well. So it is can we trust data all the time, or is there elements that we have to kind of take it with a pinch of salt, I suppose is my question.
That is a big question, James. I think that data is amazing. And if you talk to my team, they always know I'm asking about what's the data telling us, what outcomes are we trying to drive, how are we going to know if we've measured it, all of the things that as HR has developed has become really rooted in, I think. But data doesn't tell the whole story. And behind all of those statistics and all of those data, all of that data is people. And I think me growing up, I never thought about the fact that, I was on free school meals. I never thought about the fact that people, who are on free school meals don't necessarily progress into more senior positions. But I could recognise that actually, if I think about the group of friends that I had in school or in college, how many went to university out of a dozen? One, two, maybe? And how many people did I know of friends and family who'd been down that route, who are in senior positions? Not many. My parents were really great role models. My mum always worked really, really hard. So did my dad, and my dad did further education later in life. Actually had a really good job when I was a bit older. But it's not something that I necessarily thought about. And I think where we have to be careful with the data, whilst I think it's very important to have it and to understand the outcomes, and the opportunities that people have as a society, and those are real, right? Those are real. Those things are happening. And as a society, we need to
Mm.
look at how do we address those. But I think as an individual, you can't be held back by those things. And I think for me, as much as I was aware, particularly as I got older, that there weren't many people who looked like me when I looked up, still aren't, right? When I looked up. And to my mind, I was like, well, I can be the first or the second or the third. It wasn't going to deter me from, the aspirations that I have. And I think that's where we have to be careful with the data, and we don't want it to hold people back or reinforce a stereotype or a burden that they feel.
And I think the stereotype thing is a really important one, and because we do, and even again in today's world, we often people make judgments and they do stereotype people. But I think from a perspective of the podcast and your personal story, what's really impressive is that, and this is what I would urge people to do, and we'll explore this in a little bit more detail. But what I'd urge people to do is kind of almost forget what people are saying and follow what you believe you can achieve. Because what I'm hearing from you is that you kind of went, look, I can achieve whatever I put my mind to. You know, going from the pulling a pint to the general manager in the bar, or to all the way, or going to Royal Mail, and you're going in and starting your HR career in Royal Mail and going from there to where you are now as the VP of HR at ABM. So, it's really impressive that you're showcasing almost that anything is possible. Um, Now, building on that point, you said that you started your career your HR career, should I say, at Royal Mail. And clearly, Royal Mail, you obviously got a huge amount of experience there, and um, that has helped you to elevate your career to where you are today. Um, was it as easy as that, though, Charlene, or was there some steps, or was there a mistake along the way? Because, look, let's be honest, we're human beings. We often make mistakes, don't we? Or things don't quite go to plan as we set out for them to do. So, you know, talk to me a little bit about that kind of that career and up your almost the career ladder, if you like, in the HR function. And if there were any kind of mistakes or wrong jobs, or what if there were, what did you learn from it?
Yeah, that's a brilliant question, James. And I've been thinking about this as I knew we're going to be talking, and I don't like to think of things as mistakes, and I definitely don't have regrets, because lots of people say this, but I think that's because it's true. You where you
Yeah.
are now is a culmination of all the things that have come before. So if you took one of those pieces out, then you may not be where you are now. So, in hindsight, you can look back on everything as an experience, at least for learning. Definitely nothing was easy. I think I didn't mention this, and again, when I've been thinking about my career, I've always worked. I had my first job when I was 13. My dad's friend had a record shop, and he had a little bookstall as part of the shop, and I'd go and do 2 hours on a Saturday. I sold windows when I was 15. I lied about my age because I had an older friend, because you had to be 16 to work there. My dad had a shop. I worked there. I did temping. I did customer service. I did the questionnaires. I worked so many different jobs that I had, always at summer, after school, all of that. So I had a really strong work ethic. And I think having spent time in hospitality and then going into HR, into a grad scheme, young, enthusiastic, full of energy, I worked really, really hard. And I always talk about this because I feel like saying you have to work hard is a bit out of fashion these days. But I think you do, and it doesn't necessarily mean lots of hours. Sometimes it does, but it's not necessarily about the hours. It's like the effort that you put in and always trying to do the best that you can in whatever it is, whether it's pulling a pine or it's doing a training course or it's something else within your role. So hard work is something that I have always done, and I think that stood me in a good stead early in career. Because when you're early in your career, you're just learning, right? You don't know anything. You're just learning. You're just doing more, doing more, doing more, doing more. There are probably a couple of key points within my career that were quite difficult. When I was at Royal Mail, I was there through a really big period of change. I was there through the privatisation, real difficulties financially, quite a lot of the difficult things within HR, downsizing, that kind of thing. And towards, I don't know, I'd been there maybe 5 or 6 years. I moved into a head of HR role, which was for all of the corporate functions within the business. And we'd just gone through a restructuring, and that was a standalone role. So one role, 9 different functions, about 3,000 people, the whole C-suite bar operations. And it was one of the most challenging roles that I'd ever, ever done. But I learned a lot. I learned resilience. I learned tenacity. I was able to grow that team. So, over a year or so, I got a couple of extra people. I was able to develop those people. So that definitely was a time where I learned a lot. It was very hard. But again, I wouldn't say I would regretted that role because I learned so much. And then probably the other part of my career that was challenging and I learned a lot, that would be a theme, was moving into retail and moving to Sainsbury's. And at that point, I'd been at Royal Mail for 14 years. I was very well established there, as you'd expect when you'd been somewhere for that amount of time. And I did probably all the things that you shouldn't do at one time. So I took a new role in a new industry. I moved house 200 miles away. And I think for me, I'm quite a logical person. I probably lead with head sometimes more than heart. So I could map out logically, well, these are all the things that I need to do to be successful in my role. And these are all the things that are changing. And here are all my plans for how I'm going to address these changes that I'm going to be going through. But what I didn't legislate for is how I would feel and how to look after myself probably more emotionally. And so moving away, even though I'd moved away from Luton before, I'd been away to university and I'd lived away from home and it'd never been a problem. Something about this time, I found it really hard being away from home. My mum, my brother, my dad, my husband moved with me. He had some health problems when we moved and it was quite isolating. It was just the two of us without that support of our friends and family around us. And then professionally, Sainsbury's is an amazing company, really great. I learned so much, and retail is like nothing else, right? Anybody who's worked in retail will tell you that. But there were a few things for me. There was a similar culture to Royal Mail in that Sainsbury's had people with a lot of long service, really strong working relationships built over years, and trials and tribulations. And I am naturally more of an introverted person, and working in retail, I tended to find people were more extroverted. And I just found it a little bit difficult in terms of those established relationships that are already in place, naturally being a little bit more introverted. And I found it quite difficult, is the truth. And culturally, there were just a few things that didn't quite fit well, I think, with me as a person. And I remember I got a piece of feedback, and it wasn't bad feedback. It was about needing to spend more time with some of the directors and maybe deepening some of those relationships and connections. And I remember, in hindsight, I probably agonized over it way too much, right, as you do. But I remember thinking, I could do that and I could do more of that. But then I was like, but do I want to do that? And how much of myself do I need to give or change to be successful? Anyway, I don't know what the conclusion of that was, but in hindsight and in reflection, it was definitely a big learning curve. and difficult. And I think whenever you've worked somewhere for a really long time, that first move that you make is probably always going to be difficult. I didn't realize how many people I knew, how much I knew, all of those unspoken ways of how you get things done, that when you move somewhere else, you don't know. And when you're in a quite senior role with people who've probably grown up in the organisation, they've learned all of that as they've grown up, and you've been parachuted in at a senior level, and there's all of that you didn't learn because you learned it somewhere else.
Yeah,
So I know that
yeah,
I
yeah.
will never have that again, because I probably won't be at somewhere, sorry ABM, I probably won't be there for 14 years, but who knows?
We'll see. Maybe there's a follow-up podcast in about 10 years' time to see
Yeah,
where you are, Charlene.
always do it. Yeah.
But no, there's a few interesting things in there. I mean, I think first and foremost, hats off, because to throw yourself in, and there's lots of talk about the younger generation coming into the workplace and how committed they are and all this kind of great stuff. And I still think that commitment is there, but it's really nice to hear that it's it is about, sometimes you have to put that work ethic in to help yourself to learn and to develop and to grow. And I think back to my career, and if I sat there and I didn't do the extra hours or take on the extra learning or push myself a little bit further, I certainly wouldn't have got to where I got to. So that's one of those things in, and let's call it in life, that you have often have to do if you have an aspiration to grow. Now, as you say, that doesn't mean you have to do 14, 16, 18-hour days every single day of the week. It's about finding something, as you did with HR, that you truly love. So actually, that when you're doing something that you love and you are passionate about it, those extra hours or that extra discretionary effort feels easy. And I don't know whether you felt that, but certainly when I've taken on something that is new and I'm learning, and with the coaching that I do with people, it's always about trying to find things that they're passionate about. Because if you're passionate about something, it helps you to learn and to develop and to grow with ease. And often that can be the case. So we kind of fast forward a little bit. Sainsbury's was a massive learning curve, and some people might be surprised to learn that I'm a little bit of an introverted character. So what I hear about you going out and putting yourself out there can be quite difficult for a lot of people in the world of work, full stop. But if we fast forward to now, here you are today, secured a role, you're at ABM, you're the Vice President of HR for the UK and Ireland at ABM. Another success story, and probably from all the learnings that you've taken to get to this point, Charlene, you're now sitting there as a role, kind of on the UKI board as the VP of HR. How does that feel? Daunting or exciting? Or should I say, how did that feel day one when you walked into the role? Daunting or exciting?
Yeah, well, I didn't feel daunted until you said it like that. Now I'm not so sure. No, I'm joking. I feel like, so when I left Sainsbury's, I relocated back down south, and I took an interim role at Ocado Logistics, which was brilliant. I spent just under a year there developing their people strategy. So when the opportunity came up for this role, it just felt like a culmination. It felt like the perfect role at the right time, at the perfect organisation. Having worked at Royal Mail for as long as I did, I worked in their facilities management business. I was the HR director. Having spent that time in retail, having done a very specific role in Ocado, working on the people strategy and talent and development and change, it just felt like everything came together. And so I remain excited about the role for a couple of reasons. Firstly, ABM as an organisation, it wasn't one that I knew lots about. I know some of the FM industry, but they weren't a company that I was familiar with. So when I started doing my research and my due diligence, as you do, I was really pleased with what I found. The UK and Ireland business has so much opportunity to grow, and then we're powered by this huge US owner. So we have all of that kind of agility of a smaller, medium-sized business with the firepower of the US. Once you tick off the kind of organization, what kind of organization it is, what do you do, what's the role? Okay, I'm going to be covering business partnering and communications and change and L&D, tick, 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 brilliant. Quite a big footprint. Frontline workers, hourly paid service workers. I feel I can resonate with those people and what's important to them. And then you go to, but can I actually get anything done? What's the culture like? What's it really like to work there on a day-to-day basis? And the process that I always use, which doesn't seem to have failed me yet, so I stick with that, is asking lots of questions to as many people as you can ask, kind of in the same but different ways, and seeing the answers that you get. And again, I was very happy with the responses that I received in terms of how people in ABM treat each other, how they care about their workforce, how they have the ambition for growth and being in it together, etc., etc. And I found all that to be true when I've arrived. There's such a great foundation of what the business has done up until this point, and for me, it's like recognizing all the amazing work that's gone on before, but thinking about, okay, if this is where we want to get to as a business, how from a people and HR perspective do we power on from that? How do we ensure that we can scale for growth, and that all of the things that we are doing, if we were double, triple the size, could we do them in that way, or might we have to think about different ways? And it is a very kind of tight margin, lean business as well. So that just throws an extra, an extra thing in to think about when you're facing these opportunities and challenges.
Yeah, and so summary is not daunted, absolutely excited.
Most definitely. Most definitely. Now, that's not to say every now and again I don't wake up and be like, whew, there's a lot to do. But then I go, that's good. That's why I took the job. Come on, let's go.
Yeah, yeah. Very good, very good. Look, I mean, it's an amazing story, Charlene, and we haven't really touched on many stats, but I mean, there are lots of stats out there around people not being or being held back or not being as successful than those that have come from maybe privileged backgrounds or uh, higher socioeconomic backgrounds, etc. So you've certainly bucked the trend, as I call it, by doing what you've done, and it's lovely to see that the excitement and the joy of that you bring to that says, look, if you go out there and you work hard and you find something that you love and you enjoy, you can take it to wherever you want to take it to. um, and it's been a great conversation, Charlene, but one of the things I always like to finish on, and this is kind of final remarks. A fascinating story. There's been loads that people have probably learned through hearing that story. But what would be the sort of, when you reflect on your career or your journey or your story right from the early days, what were I don't know, the couple of takeaways that you'd like to share as sort of your final remarks before we close down and say goodbye?
What do I think? Well, I think that it's really important to not be defined by these statistics and not be defined by other people's expectations. And there might be research behind this. I haven't done the research, but I do think some of the reason why people from more privileged backgrounds, people who come from more financially secure backgrounds, tend to do better is because I think there's a level of security and support and a level of people telling you and building you up that you can do whatever you set your mind to. And so I think that anybody can have that. I got that from my parents. I got that from my teachers. I got that from myself. So even though I didn't come from that kind of background, I wasn't held back, and I was definitely given the encouragement to push myself forward. So that would be the number one. Don't let other people define you. Don't let the area that you're from or your peer group, you know, even if you have a goal, even if you don't hit 100% of it, you might hit 80. If you never had a goal, then you may not hit any of it. So I think that's the first thing. I talked about working hard. I stand by that. Um, for me personally, I feel like education has been very important. Having a degree, doing my master's degree in CIPD as well, which Royal Mail sponsored me for, I feel really helped me. I think it gave me a level of confidence within myself. It's not for everybody, but for me, it definitely was something that was important. So it may not be education for you. It might be more vocational. It might be something else. But what is that thing that's going to give you
Mm,
that a bit more confidence or give you that foundation for the role that you're going for? And then, as people always say, but I think they say it because it's very important, your networks, your sponsors, your mentors, your coaches, all of that good stuff. I cannot stress it more highly. We probably need another podcast to talk about all of the people that have helped me and supported me throughout my career. And as somebody, as I mentioned, that is tends to be more on the introvert side before I get to know people, don't always find that easy, actually.
mm,
Don't always find it easy to ask people for help. What I found over the years is people like helping each other. People don't mind if you ask for help. You know, people are quite glad to give it to you. So don't ever feel embarrassed or like you're bothering somebody. If they
mm.
don't have time, they'll tell you they don't have time. But in most cases, people will make the time. So yeah, don't be held back. Use all of those networks. Find the thing that's going to give you your confidence. For me, education. For you, it might be something else.
Yeah, yeah. And there's a common theme with the other podcasts that we've done that are along a similar line to that last point that you make, which is whether it be a mentor, whether it be a coach, whether it be a family member, a parent, a brother, a sister, an auntie, an uncle, it doesn't matter who it is, understanding your supporters
Uh-huh.
and asking your supporters for advice, for help, for whatever it is that you need plays such a big part in anyone's career trajectory because you need them to help you overcome some of these fears and anxieties that sometimes you have. And you're lucky that you walked into your ABM role feeling excited, but sometimes lots of people can feel daunted. And we touched on imposter syndrome before this podcast that we were talking about, so it's the same kind of thing. Having those supporters around you that can help you drive you forward. And what's really um, good for me to see as somebody that sits as a recruiter and been in the talent acquisition world for many years is that there's opportunities for everyone out there. And those barriers that were once there are slowly starting to come down. And whether it be a degree, whether it be a vocational qualification, there is actually, when you start delving into it, and I know we touched on this in a conversation that we had, Charlene, when you were talking about ABM, when you dive into all of those things, early careers, apprenticeships, or whatever they might be, there are so many out there now. So if education isn't for you, there is always something else there that you can go and explore that can get you onto the ladder to help you progress. It doesn't always have to be the degree, but you were very lucky that you enjoyed it and
Mm.
uh, you then went on and did a master's in HR as well, which is amazing. So, look, Charlene, what a great story that you've shared with us today. Thank you for joining me on the podcast. Thank you for sharing your story. I know there'll be huge inspiration there for all of the people that are listening that says you can make it. And just as a closing note, stats, do they lie? They can do. Take them sometimes with a pinch of salt. And if a stat says no, you can't do that, try and break it because that's the best way forward, in my view. So thank you for joining me, Charlene. Um, I guess anyone wants to get in touch with you, I can share your LinkedIn profile
Yes, of
underneath here.
course. Mhm.
Yeah. So if anyone wants to get in touch with Charlene, click on the link below on her LinkedIn profile and connect with her. But just leaves me to say thank you very much for joining me, Charlene, and hope you've enjoyed the podcast.
Thank you. It's been very enjoyable. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.